You heard the testimony yesterday. These are themes the commissioners were very keen to get closer to. How much trouble do you think Shibiri is this morning?
Good morning, Iman, and good morning, Arabile and Zianda. He is already been seen, I think, without any prejudice, because Matlala called him so as the inside man for Matlala. And that has significant implications because that means by virtue of his office, he's at advantageous position as the head of organized crime. He had particular privileged information. He was in a position to benefit someone like Matlala. And he, even if that's just with his insider knowledge or cooperation, he doesn't have to do much more than that, than just to provide information or access to, or as in this case, a timely tip-off. That is enough to be considered as an inside man. And inside man in and of itself, that's why he took exception to being called to Matlala saying, that's my man or that's my person. Because that in itself, depending on context, has either a positive or a negative implication. So effectively, I think he's painted himself into a corner. He has not been fully truthful and forthcoming to the commission. And it would have behooved him or served him better just to admit two things, because the more you try to hide or provide improbable explanations for things, the more you're actually painting yourself as guilty, Iman.
But again, as we say, you've got to follow the money and you've got to follow the evidence. The evidence which connects to the allegations maintain that he had these relationships with suspected crime bosses, including Matlala. That loan, which again, the timing creates a different narrative around how that money was exchanged and the reason for why it was exchanged, and also issues relating to political interference. I think some of the things we found a little bit curious as well is a lack of a basic understanding of how investigations into, for example, WhatsApp messages would be brought and shared with the commissioners, and him asking for assistance in there. And over time, we've seen what appear to be senior police officers who don't seem to have the gravitas, if you will, to occupy those high positions in terms of just understanding how things work.
Well, it's unfortunate because when I first made contact with South Africa Police Service, they were still using, word perfect for a number of years after everybody else went onto a different system. Unfortunately, the South African Police Service is still trapped in the 20th century, and they're policing in the 21st century. And that's not an easy thing to say. And it's neither an indictment. It's actually an encouragement and admonition to say, please, let's transform the South African Police Service. Let's transform the systems. Let's transform the technology. But let's also ensure that we appoint people through a process that ensure that they fit for the job in which they go in. And that's why a lot of the senior police officers are actually dependent on more junior officers to do certain things for them. Yeah. Whether it's to write their reports or whether it's to use particular pieces of technology or to be runners for them. Unfortunately, they place these officers in a position where they will commit acts that eventually will compromise them. And they hope as junior officers they would have the protection of a senior officer, and they don't. So it is unfortunate that this relationship and this whole Matlanga and ad hoc inquiry has now cast a spotlight on what we already had concern about. And it was written into the NDP 2030 that we have to ensure we appoint the right people for the right job with the right skills, knowledge, and attitude. And without that, we will always face the risk and be vulnerable to the kind of things that we see coming out of Matlanga at the moment, where officers are being compromised simply because they're out of their depth in the position that they are, but they're almost untouchable until they are actually caught out at a higher court, so to speak, or a higher platform like Matlanga or the courts, Iman.
Fit for purpose is the term I want to reinvoke. Just very quickly as we close, what was also interesting, and we've heard this before though, Shibiri suggesting that officers were promoted after testifying against him. It leads us back to the concept of the factional battles inside the SAPS. This is still concerning, and how does it affect real investigating?
Well, yeah, because unfortunately, we still have a conflation of role and rank in the South African police services. And that is that we're not appointing people into positions where they are actually best utilized. And it puts a lot of stress on somebody who may have grown up in the HR environment, somebody ending up in an investigation environment as a brigadier, a colonel, or even as a general. And their junior officers look to them for leadership and direction, and they're unable to provide that. Because the only way we can recognize and reward somebody is that we place them in higher office, or we give them a bigger rank. And that means that we actually moving people out of positions where they can best be utilized. So we need to look at why people get promoted. Is it a recognition of their skills, their knowledge, and their competencies effectively, and their right fit for that position before, and the promotion, so to speak, is just to imbue them with additional authority and give them the operational tools to be able to do their work, because that is where they fit well, rather than this is a reward for something as nefarious as supporting the case against somebody because you belong to one or other faction, Iman.
I want to hang on to you just a little bit longer, Eldred, because this morning as we speak, the SANDF's been deployed into various communities across Gauteng. One of the concerns is the mandate and their cooperation and collaboration with the SAPS. Who tells who to do what in the field?
Well, ultimately, the providing support to the South African police services or any domestic law enforcement component by the South African Defence Force as part of their secondary duties. They work and march under the command or under direction of the South African police. However, there seems to be a real fight between the generals of the SANDF and that of the South African police services. And I think part of that is because from what we hear is that there haven't been joint planning. So they are supposed to be there for ensure that any operation undertaken by local and domestic law enforcement, that operation can be secured, that the perimeter is protected, and that they are bolstered or, from any attack from any criminals on the ground or any blowback that actually happens. So we haven't seen what their mandate is. It hasn't been made clear, and it should have been made clear. There should have been consultation with communities, affected communities and their representatives and community leadership to ensure that there's a real understanding, not just of, they don't have to give operational details, but this is the doctrine and the mandate, and this is the posture. And if the posture is one of, we won't take any nonsense, that's fine. Communities are expecting them to be tough and to go in there and act on behalf of the communities. But they also expected them to do that while retaining the dignity of those involved and ensuring that the constitutional imperative to be a part of decisions that affect you is actually maintained. They cannot trample on that, and they run the risk in the way they're going about it. It's actually alienating that community over the long term, as opposed to actually building the capacities and relations within that community in the short to long term.
Yeah. I want to invoke the old adage that anything for us without us is against us, as you say. The question of whether the community has been brought into those discussions to share from their perspective their expectations is something I'll certainly put to the Deputy Minister as to how this operational plan was devised and who was around the table. EDK, Eldred de Klerk, thank you as always. We appreciate your time and your expertise.